Welcome to Poetry Flash. Our reading series is having another wonderful reading today. I'm Joyce Jenkins, Poetry Flash editor and director, and I'm beaming to you from Poetry Flash in Berkeley, California. Today we are very pleased to present Connie Post, Margo Taft Stever, and Stephanie Strickland. In the chat box, thanks to Moe's Books in Berkeley, there is a bookshop.org link to purchase new books by these poets, plus a link from Small Press Distribution to purchase Stephanie Strickland's How the Universe is Made. I wanted to remind you that if you want to be on the list for these events, to sign up for our event emails, scroll down at poetryflash.org to join our mailing list. And remember to visit poetryflash.org for new reviews, interviews, online events, workshops, calls for submissions, all kinds of goodies. Here to introduce our poets is Richard Silberg, Associate Editor of Poetry Flash.
Hi, everybody. Our first reader will be Connie Post, who has actually read for us many times back when we were real flesh and blood people, which presumably will be again sometime fairly soon. But Connie is here by the magic of Zoom. She's going to be reading from her new book, Prime Meridian, which let me try to hold it up for you without.
You don't need to.
I don't need to, but here it is, as well as you can see it. There are two, I'll call them earth poems in this book. The first one is Fault Lines, which is, it begins with an earthquake, which is like, if I may interpret it, a metaphor for the kind of insecurity that comes with this insecure family, with the father who is the villain of the piece and appears actually at the beginning and the end, but there's a family of two sisters who get beaten. The father appears in their bedroom at midnight. We can only guess, you don't really have to guess what he's doing. He's doing some grievous things. The second Earth poem is the title poem, Prime Meridian, which stands as its own lyric poems, as the poems throughout the book do. But also, if I can interpret it, it's as though the poet is born from the earth rather than through the family that birthed her humanly. And the father appears at the end, or is talked about at the end. The poet leaves the family. She has her own life. She traces his life. He dies at the end. There's an obituary. And then a black squirrel appears at the very end of this book, like the spirit of the father. And she looks him in the eye. If I may, Connie, these are the last lines of the book. Our eyes meet, and for that split second, I see how I have banished the secret body within the body. I see his small heart pulsing, how sorrow fills a cavern and keeps beating. So here she is, Connie Post. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Well, thank you, Richard. It's really good to see you. And it's so good to see all the faces of so many friends and people I care about. You know who you are. Richard, it's good to see you again, and we'll see each other in the flesh again, I'm sure. But I wanted to thank Joyce Jenkins and Richard for putting so much time and energy into this amazing series. And I'm so happy to be joining Stephanie and Margo. Glad we were able to come together on this day. In the chat box, if you do at the end want to get a signed copy, also there's some information there for you, but I will just begin. And so, yeah, I think actually Richard inspired me to start with the title poem. And the title is, let me see what time it is Prime Meridian, because I wrote in this book parallels around how the earth has been fractured by so much damage it's been done by climate change and all the things that humans do to it, and how in turn the body responds to trauma. So I'll just set the stage with the title poem, Prime Meridian. Step upon the earth as if it is melting. Fold the continents as if the borders were already singed at the edges. Hold a container and let all of the oceans run inside of it. Drink the salt until it is all that is left of us. Succumb to the talons of the last orphaned eagle. Let it pull you up by your shirt collar and sail you across the life you were supposed to have. Look down and watch the glaciers fall, the oceans rise, the inlets of every river drown inside themselves. Listen for the sound of your own voice falling backwards. Listen for the sound of the ocean turning itself under, as if the earth were a womb and you, the child, passing through. A lot of the poems in the book relate how I attach to nature in order to survive some of those things and my attachment there. So this one, Walking Beside October. I come across a blue-gray salamander frozen in the middle of the wooden bridge. I step over it and it thanks me by scurrying away. I think of the way I used to stop in the hallway when you'd pass, hoping you would not spill your Jack Daniels down my legs, hoping your shirt buttons were fastened. I remind myself why I take walks at dusk when the sunlight abandons the house. I hear solstice calling me home. I hear the salamander move the weeds aside and run back to the shallow creek bed. I look back and thank this traveler of this small country for teaching me how to move across a rugged terrain without a passport or even a name. Give me 1 second. I have to just holler at my husband. That was the turn the TV all the way down, please. This next one is, you guys can hear me okay, right? Thumbs up? Okay, good. It's about watching the YouTube of Nadia Comaneci, which many of you know who are older. She was the first gymnast to get the perfect 10 score in gymnastics. 1976 YouTube of Nadia Comaneci. I watched the video over and over, fixate on her thin frame, her small poised hands. She was 14, I was 14. Her body takes flight above the uneven parallel bars. The first perfect 10 score. I sat on the hardwood floor, my legs crossed, pretzel-like, breakable. In 1976, I too was practicing floor exercise and found ways to unfold my body. I learned how to hold myself in specific postures, found ways to fall gracefully. Often I wondered about Romania. I wondered about small rooms and the way she looked at herself in the mirror late at night. I watched Nadia. I watched her. I prayed for her safe landing. I kneeled in front of a television set and ignored the smell of booze and the particular way it crept under my door at night. I wonder now if she looks back, does she ponder how she escaped, how a young woman will cross a border decades later, knowing she could never return? And now we're going to get into the kind of deeper part of the book with what Richard was referring to as far as some of the parts that I endured and survived. So it was a scary book for me to write for all the obvious reasons, but I still feel like I'm better in the truth than not in the truth. Gardening. After my father would beat one of us, he would place flowers on the kitchen table the next morning. He cut the stems flush and laid the begonias in a circle in an inch of water. The lavender and fuchsia permeated the morning. We were called to breakfast, we ate waffles and said nothing of the raging blooms. The apologies buried in the ordered way the flowers were arranged. We looked down at our plates, eating, gorging, ignoring his sun-scorched hands. These days, I spend time pulling petals out of my body, placing a shovel in the open earth, placing flowers back into the ground. This next one is a little bit usually harder for me to read, but I feel very compelled to read it. Many of you may or may not know that the Korean War is often referred to as the Forgotten War. So that's my opening. Forgotten War. You stumbled around the house through most of the 1970s, sometimes muttering things about young Korean girls I didn't understand. You took long fishing trips to the dark water and wouldn't return until there was no breath left in that lake. I asked Mom about it once. I knew you had been in a war, but didn't understand it had anything to do with your off-center gait, the rage you held in your right shoulder, the passing out at 7 p.m. on the couch. One day, I went to get a popsicle in the garage refrigerator, and you were standing there as your one hand is always on the Pabst Blue Ribbon. And I asked, did you ever kill anyone in the war? You went silent, looked away. But I knew already. I knew it in the way you laid the hooked fish on the counter, the way you cut one long line down each body, severing their forgiven skins, taking the eyes out, saying they were a delicacy in other countries, you seeing in me how relieved I was they could not see you anymore. I knew the lake would somehow disavow the fish as I have you, but at times when I drive past a murky lake, I still see us stumbling over the soul-soaked fields of our forgotten war. And soul is spelled S-E-O-U-L, like the capital. One more poem about a fish, deboning a fish. It's amazing how much mileage you can get out of stuff later in your life when you have these images in your head, but you're not really sure how they're going to congeal into a poem. Deboning a fish. I wonder what the fish saw in my father when he gutted them, before he gutted them. Were they relieved to know they'd soon be out of misery? Relieved to stop the gasping for air, to cease the futile flailing around the countertop? Did they wait within themselves and pray for the long knife? Did they remember the lake, its muddy bottom, knowing they can never return? You can tell me, and I already know, that fish don't understand these kinds of things, but neither does a small child. At some point, don't we all beg for mercy? I'm going to do that one. This next one is about how it feels to be separated from somebody because it's safer, but it's still painful. So I imagine myself in different countries, living abroad. I want to move to a country where everyone speaks another language. Each person a different dialect, each neighborhood an unfamiliar terrain. I want to live in a back house where the gardener understands why I will not water the flowers. I want to live at the end of a dirt road where the path has blended into the field. I want to listen only to the story of the coyotes who cry out to me in the linguistics of forgotten tongues. I do not want to remember how love falls away and blends into the side alleys of an abandoned city. I do not want to know that you live halfway across town, broken in your Alzheimer's, broken from the decades we have not spoken. I will close the heavy door tonight, set out on my own. I will wander like a displaced foreigner looking for a frail older woman who resembles you, who cannot speak my name. The next two are about my attachment to birds. Another part about kind of attaching to language. And I have both kind of this attachment to birds, but sometimes a revulsion, like there's certain ways that they struggled. I think sometimes they remind me of myself if they felt trapped or were hurting. Raven in flight. The sky has never forgiven you for your blackness. When you fly inside the backdrop of night, I am the only one who sees you. You claw your way into my dreams, but I cannot find you in the morning. Your beak weighs heavy on the ruined dusk. I hear your guttural call when I am running down to the dry riverbed. I remember the same way you flew over me when I was running away in second grade, how you knew my mother would find me, how you have pulled away at the skin of my regret. Years have passed and still you land at random on the uneven fence of silence, always helping me to understand what it means to live as the heretic, to realize there is no contrition in the fading light. The next one is just a comment on silence. And I feel like, at least for me, since the pandemic, we've all kind of developed a different relationship with silence, kind of being not in the world in the same way. Excuse me. Infatuation. I am in love with silence, the way it can fracture a room, how it moves across the stairway through you as if you wore the wrong dress. I step in and out of the false quiet as if it is a kept woman, as if it understands the agreements of entrance and exit. I hold its hand only when convenient, only behind the champagne table when no one else is looking. I act as if the wooden beams of the ceiling are not falling. I pretend this room was not built on a fault line. I pretend the plates of language have not slipped like a loose jawbone. And I am not standing here bracing myself in a doorway already collapsing. I definitely picked out my bird series this time for this reading. I was picking them out as my 6-year-old grandson was screaming. We have this path up by our house, and there was this bird that was dying over this period of days. It was very hard for me to watch. How to watch a bird die. Take the dog out early in the morning. Notice the same eucalyptus, how the crow is still perched, half frozen, on the same midpoint of the tree. Notice how the claws are stuck and how the back of your neck seems damp and full of sunlight all at once. Each day, tell yourself it will be over soon. Tell yourself that's just the way nature works. Tell yourself it's intrusive to do anything else. Urge the dog to walk closer to you instead of pulling you back to the tree over and over. Remind yourself you have to get back and make breakfast. Imagine how peaceful a bird looks when it is finally melting into the dirt. Imagine the ground is atonement and the murder of crows just taking flight are finally free of sin. I wanted to do one that was not a bird one about a hula hoop. A lovely toy that so many of us, we tried to learn to do when we were young. Hula Hoop Turns 50, which was Associated Press, June 19th, 2008. So I wrote this a while ago, but I wanted to read it. In 1967, there were a few things I wanted more than my own cylindrical, smooth, plastic, neon pink hoop. Like a story, I climbed inside the sphere again and again when my waist was still straight and bony. Countless times I dropped to the back patio. The scratches around the rim always appeared after the first few days of summer. I never understood the shoop shoop noise, what places of the earth were inside it, but it must have been the deepest black. I believed it had something to do with the reason my father walked towards me so often, watching intently the motion of my hips, teaching my body to understand the irrevocable forces of gravity. Each week, I learned better how to navigate my own talents. I already knew I was a sinner, as my mother told me at night, for not saying my prayers. But I knew, better than she, what was more important. I practiced all the time. I was bonded to the idea of retrieval, how the hoop would drop below my knees, spiral downwards, how desperately I needed to be able to predict descent. The summers passed, the patio covering crumbled in unpredictable patterns. Eventually, I started practicing in the side yard, but he found me anyway. I forgot how to pray. but each day I would rehearse, understanding better each time the undulations of a broken dance, the sound of the death rattle. I'm going to close with my poem that Richard mentioned called Omen. And I ended with it because it's more of my redemptive poem. And for me, anyways, this poem is about seeing a part of my own self in the squirrel. But there was a black squirrel that frequented our yard for at least 2 or 3 years. And I had a big issue, a complicated relationship with a squirrel, which is somewhat resolved in the poem. Omen. For 3 years, the black squirrel visits our backyard. I say I hate it. It doesn't look right. I read in science magazines that it's a mutation, a normal occurrence in nature, but every day I think it's a bad omen. Every day I encourage the dogs to run after him. I watch his whirling, curling ascent up the tree. I find relief as he moves away from me into the next yard. Winter passes through me. A close friend my age dies of a brain tumor. I do not wear black to the funeral. Later that week, I step outside in mid-afternoon and see the black squirrel sitting quietly by our pond. Our eyes meet, and for that split second, I see how I have banished the secret body within the body. I see his small heart pulsing, how sorrow fills a cavern and keeps beating. Thank you. Thank you.
Now you're okay.
Here we go. Thank you, Connie.
You are so
Thank you
welcome.
very
Thank you, everybody.
much. Our next reader is Margo Taft Seaver, and her new book is Cracked Piano. And there's an introduction that explains what maybe doesn't even really need an explanation, because the book stands again on its own lyricism. But the central section of the book is based on letters from Peter R. Taft, who is Margot's great grandfather, I believe, who is put into a mental hospital cruelly, unfairly. The cracked piano of the title is played to Peter by one of the patients, not to him, but they're all together, and he's clinking ugly notes on his cracked piano. There's a lunatic ball. The introduction talks about the kind of unconscious cruelty of the treatment of patients, the way people would sit and watch the lunatic ball, which was thought to be therapeutic for the patients. Perhaps it was, but it was also a kind of a circus for people who would come and watch the lunatics twirling together. The book is full of sadness. It's full of isolation. There are poems, probably through Peter's persona, and there are poems later from a female persona, perhaps Margo herself, but they're meditations on depression and isolation, but they fly on their own spare lyricism. So let's welcome her, Margo Taft Seaver.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I wanted to thank Joyce Jenkins for the opportunity to read in the Poetry Flash reading series. I'm honored to be reading with Connie Post and Stephanie Strickland. We've been planning this reading for a long time. We were going to be really excited to come to California and read in September, but that didn't work out. So it's great to be here today tonight on Zoom. And I'm going to begin by reading poems, and mostly read poems from my book, Cracked Piano. This is the cover. In case you can see it, it actually is a cover of a cracked piano. And as Richard mentioned, my great-grandfather, Peter Austin Taft, was institutionalized in the Cincinnati Private Hospital for the Insane, possibly because he contracted typhoid fever and almost died and never fully recovered. It's really unclear what the reason for it is. I'm still trying to find that out. But because of the scourge of hospitalization, he became essentially a disappeared person. And I wanted to read first the poem that Richard mentioned about the lunatic ball. In the latter half of the 19th century, as part of a humanistic movement in the treatment of mental patients, hospital superintendents held balls, and sometimes spectators were invited. The Lunatic Ball, after Dance in a Madhouse by George Bellows. Furious dancing gives way to screams. 5 men stare ghoulish at the wall. This is the lunatic ball. The best student Yale had ever seen. 3 months after graduation, typhoid, brains swelled inside his skull. They dosed out calomel. 5 ghosts appeared in a mercury dream. Headaches unbearable. This is a lunatic ball. Married 1 year, baby the next. His wife filed for release. The medical textbooks he gleaned futile, endless stall. A woman names her baby doll Christ, lurches, leans, a building in an earthquake, then she crawls. This is a lunatic ball. One man plays a flute, calls himself Faunus. Another uses an invisible latrine. Attendants haul out a wild man in a straitjacket on a wooden beam. A woman growls like a bear. This is a lunatic ball. Behind a glass wall, well-dressed spectators riveted sit amused. Looking at them looking, the patients know they are through. Spectacled men sport great coats and laced up women make jokes in the shimmering hall. Peter was actually at a lunatic ball that he writes about in one of the letters. And I'm going to read one of the found poems in the collection, which is a letter he wrote to his father, titled Cracked Piano, Cincinnati Sanitarium, Private Hospital for the Insane, April 2nd, 1878. Dear Father, I am alone this evening as every, alone. An artist of imperfect mind is endeavoring to extract harmonious discords out of a cracked piano just at my left. Life here is of the plainest, I might say, of the hardest kind. Last Sunday, Mr. and Mrs. John Whetstone came to this institution to see her brother, but Mrs. W spent some time on this floor. She stayed all night of Sunday and until noon Monday. Her visit was a godsend to me. Tell Tilly that I have enjoyed the fruit and preserves. Tell Tilly that it hurts me to write her, but if she will come and see me, it will do me more good than anything that could happen. My foot is sore and needs a healing application. Each patient has a separate room with a carpet, a bed, a table, a washstand, a box, and 1 chair, but no gas and no candles. There are 2 tables, one for the sane portion of this community, 1 table for the patients, the other for the attendants. At the head of the patient's table sits Colonel Passot, who is never guilty of 2 consecutive ideas. He is, moreover, quite dirty. On his right side sits your son. On Colonel Passot's left resides a Mr. Williams who cannot articulate so as to make himself understood. He consists principally of hair. Next to him sits his special attendant, Mr. O'Brien, and on the right side of your son sits a small German, the Duke, with whiskers and eyeglasses. He is constantly saying things that strike him as witty, and he laughs. He is a good deal of a fool. On the table further down sits Mr. McNeil, the tormentor of the piano, and a Mr. Gillespie, who has been here for about a year. He is going away in May. The latter has privileges to go out without attendant. Further on is a thick-faced individual who never speaks and whom I will denominate as Mr. Blank. The conversation is neither amusing nor instructive. It is liberally interspersed with grunts by Mr. Williams, the man of hair, or hearty laughs by the man from Illinois. But the bottom of the page is reached. A kiss to the baby, your affectionate son, Peter. He had actually graduated from Yale as the best student in the class valedictorian, but also the best student. Yale had graduated at that time and then got typhoid fever 3 months after graduation. And that was kind of the end of his life in a lot of ways. The next poem that I'll read, when I was a child, we designated a certain tree as a grandfather tree, and that's in this poem. And we used to make offerings to the tree. Idiot's Guide to Counting. How do you become one with the horse, riding and becoming the act of riding, and the horse becoming the self and the other at exactly the same second, counting strides, counting muscle movement, counting fences, hurtling over them with the horse, counting the everything of one. How do you count? How do you pull a muscle turning over in bed at night? Measurements that change everything, counting back to everything, the everything of one, the pulled muscles of the back of one, the entanglement of one, the waves of particles, counting back the quantum. How to become one with the branches of a tree, a grandfather tree in an apple orchard that no longer exists. Separate one from tree, horse, counting numbers, counting the grandfather tree to find the solution of one. Counting trees, leaves, counting everything as no longer existing, counting trees as one with the everything that no longer exists. A number of the poems in this collection are ekphrastic, and that means based on artwork. And I'm going to read one of them, which is was inspired by Van Gogh's self-portrait with bandaged ear. Van Gogh to his mistress. He sensed his ear, but he could not see it. In the blind, this is called blind sight. The last failed effort of the body to survive. Keep this object carefully. The ear rested on the table alone among blue tints and suppressed shadows. To present an ear in the middle of the night, an arterial flap of bat's wing, wing of angel. The mercurial role of mothers forms another thematic core of this collection. And I'm going to read one about a legal case that one of my brothers-in-law tried in New Hampshire. It's titled Splitting Wood. It was the thought of his entering their infant's room that drove her. She remembered his face the first time she saw him, now half gone from whiskey, eyes hooded like a hawk's. He said he'd kill the children when he woke. The neighbors heard it, the screams they heard. His workman's hand, his gnarled hand dangled down. The knife lay by the bed. She slipped from the covers while he slept, placed her feet on the floorboards just so. The dogs barked outside, snapdragons, flowered tongues, and all the wired faces of the past strung up. The axe hung on the porch woodpile nearby, each log plotted, uneasily entwined. The children's tears were rain, Tears were watering the parched hills. The wild moon foamed at the mouth. The wild moon crept softly at her feet. The arms that grabbed the axe were not her own, that hugged it to her heart while he slept were not hers, the cold blade sinking in his skin. She grew up in the country splitting wood. She knew just how much it took to bring a limb down. And here's another mother-related poem titled Bottomland. Evening tidings, the preparations, each nestle, each cheep like chicks calling, the winnowing anomie, all come to call too late, come to call for sleep. How a mother can change from angel to sour mud queen of all decay by those who feel the sting, by those who cry out. Flail my heart upon the stone in the grove near the riverbank, rushing water to the river break. Even the known becomes unknowable. Their small eyes look at me like chicks gathered against rain, staved. Thin rivulets of fear running away with its self-fear, fearful fear. No one can talk to you. No one can listen. No one can touch you. This is not stillness. This is not the keeper of the estuary of the deep. Don't forget me. Don't forget that hill the horses cantered you down to the bottom land. From this stone, ageless heart, remember your mother, a mother who loved her children. I wanted to read two poems that Joyce Jenkins was kind to publish in Poetry Flash. This one's titled, My Mother is Dying. In the place where she belongs, suffering erases itself. Doves bring her seeds. Horses sleep next to her in the straw. Where she belongs, a welcoming place holds her, keeps her from running away. The greenness of the hay turning to gold. Already the restless trajectory, my mother is busy dying. She no longer knows my name. This is the wind of Eden, the wand of change, the last slave of silence, the knave of rain. So quiet the roving of each vacant quest. Let her be buried in the sea by the seaberry, the briar rock, the fossil chamber. Alone, blown, roadside stray, the flown, restless, wayward ringing, bells clang, ocean downcast rolls. Wandering once again, now I return to the center, searching the level earth, calling her name, remembering that I am lost. The path unfurls before my dog and me, walking to the rocks, the ocean on one side, the bay on the other, eiders blessing the waves. The seagull's spontaneous burst, how it hurts with the radio blaring. My mother is dying, gone from a body that has abandoned her. Cry because everything goes haywire, because this is Apollo's siren lyre, the field-worn answer, the childless response, children waiting for some God to bring them home. And here's the second poem, Strange Familiarities of Death. The man who had no hope of dry cleaning burnt his store to get insurance. The army chaplain spoke of a mushroom cloud as beautiful. Generals shredded reports of danger. This bomb is only a test, the radio blurted. The women of St. John, Utah saw the cloud rise, the searing wind. Soldiers lowered into foxholes. You have nothing to fear. Stay inside your houses. The force of the wind was molten iron blowing over them. Blood ran from their eyes. They could see bones through their skin. The earth burned their feet. The snow, when it came later, was gray. And now I wanted to read a couple of poems from a chapbook that was also published by Cattywampus Press the same year as Cracked Piano. And it's most of the poems in the collection, many of them actually are on about the sixth extinction, which we're currently stumbling through. But I wanted to read one of the poems first that is not on that topic and is instead on one of our most mysterious inanimate objects, dolls. The dolls wait for the children to wake up. They lie on their backs, staring upwards as though the ceiling were a resting place. For them, love is what counts, holding them, talking softly, making certain they sleep comfortably in their beds. Knowing how to dress dolls is an art, just what color socks each takes, like pouring tea, how many gowns, where the shoes go. Dressing could take all day or just a second. Dirt sticks to a doll. Remember, rain is not right for her. Exposure to the elements breaks down a doll's resistance. Wait until storms abate before leaving with your doll. Time means nothing to her. She will wonder about rain, about everything trains bring. Tree flowers drape light strands like spider babies in soft winds. Dolls are restless on their feet all day, listening for helicopters. They gather on roads after rainfall to smell the concrete getting wet, the newly soaked pavement almost drunk after a dry spell. Dolls on boats head for rocks in high winds. How many times they wish the boat could reverse, but before motors were invented, everyone jumped ship. Each day, supermarket racks sport headlines, supermarket racks sport headlines, dolls gone sour, dolls born with beards, hair grown with snakes, Medusa-like. The last poem that I'll read is the subtext of this poem.
I would do the late shift. That makes
This is the last poem I'm going to read, and the subtext of this poem would have seemed far-fetched not too many years ago. End of horses. I write to you from the end of the time zone. You must realize that nothing survived after the horses were slaughtered. We sleep below the hollow, burned out stars. We look into dust bowls searching for horses. When you walk in the country, you will be shocked to meet substantial masses on the road. We do not know whom to blame or where the horses were driven, who slaughtered them or for what purpose. Had the horses slept under the linden trees, the generals and engineers pucker and snore on the veranda. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Margo. Margo Taft Seaver, it's our genuine pleasure to have you in the series, and let's hope it's not the last time. Okay, our third poet is Stephanie Strickland, who is prolific and prodigious, if I may say so. She's got 9 books of poems. We have 2 books here, How the Universe is Made, which is new and selected, and her newest book, Ringing the Changes. And there's really so much going on in these books, an astounding variety of forms, and by that I mean not villanelles and sonnets, but different ways of approaching a poem, of speaking. And there are many historical figures in the book. One of them, here goes my ugly English pronunciation, Simone Weil. And Stephanie has a poem in which she discusses the way in which that name should be pronounced, and it's not vile like the German because, but the family pronounced it "vey" like the German "woe." And let me just read a short poem, if I may. This seems to me the lyric pole of Stephanie's work. And the poem is, she said, this is Simone. She said, when from the depth of our being we seek a sound which does mean something. When we cry out for an answer, it is not granted, then we touch the silence of God. Some begin to talk to themselves, as do the mad. Some give their hearts to silence. Now, the other pole of her work, if I may say this, is in the new book, Ringing the Changes, which I wouldn't even call prose poetry. It's pure thinking, sections of pure, engrossing, often very difficult thinking. And in between, there are all kinds of continuous meditations, different ways of, as I say, of approaching poetry. And it's wonderful to read through these poems. We won't hear, but we'll only hear a little snippet, but here we go. Here goes Stephanie Strickland. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Richard. I want to start by reading a quote. To forget is to offend, and memory, when it is shared, abolishes this offense. If we want to share the beauty of the world, if we want to be in solidarity with the world, with its suffering, we need to learn how to remember together. Edouard Glissant. In this reading, I want to remember people who inspired me, poems that inspired me, actions that inspired me. First of all, the poet and activist Muriel Rukeyser. His poem is called Love That Gives Us Ourselves, Muriel Rukeyser. She said disowning is the only treason. She said we pretend coldness or pretend we are used to the world. She said, all I touch has failed, and the beginning was real. She said, by imagining the child can cope with loss, be at home. It is a work of images, difficult and bare, very slow, like falling in love, desire shadows its fulfillment. She said, now I speak only words I can believe, no sly, resonant pity. Her short questions, the gravel of her answers comes back to me again and again in waves. Turn with your whole life, choosing. Everything here is real, she said, and of our joy. Her mother didn't answer. Even past death, language incomplete between them. Intense desire scorches its fulfillment. I remember next Emily Dickinson and her equally solitary and admirable contemporary, Willard Gibbs, the country's first mathematical physicist. Articulate among us. Emily Elizabeth Dickinson, Josiah Willard Gibbs. Never married, never moved from their family home. I am so potent, I can reach you only after wave upon wave of dilution. You will rediscover, but not read me. I have built a language to make my work more pure. A pure inquiry into unity has concerned this nation ever since it claimed independence through union. Cornerstones of the church on the green in New Haven, monuments to regicide. Dickinson, a fire bride, a bomb, a volcano. As alive or more so in the grave as out of it, showing us this across the garden fence of the grave, speaking in the tomb, of the tomb, as of a ride, one of many, every poem, one of many no-name inquiries. But we have her numbered. Is Dickinson articulate? Did Higginson, Johnson, Franklin, would Bloom, if Bloom spoke of her, make her articulate? She said the grave gave her language. Whitman said the future, always sampling the future, enlisting the future. And Gibbs, a prisoner of his own unwillingness to auction his mind, who built a mathematic language to make his work more pure, who made it so pure it sublimed instantly into zones of power and remains enthroned there, isolated there. The supremely articulate among us, Amistad Africans, mutineers for freedom on the ship they commandeered, stole from the captain and steered by their own light and by starlight to a new world, a rock-bound coast, a world not wilderness alone, but wilderness with courts in it and canon and codes of presentation, a world of sacred language, their own language attacked, active virus, ancient knowledge that it was. They perplex, no translator, no way maker, no wizard wise woman sponsor, only the valley itself of the Connecticut River, who brought from itself, with the help of Sarah, Jonathan Edwards, a valley itself with its snow and snow water so far from home. I am so potent. I can reach you only by submitting to wave upon wave of dilution. So potent, only I can reach you. Now, soon. And where are we now? Varieties of ecocide. Does it matter? Text 30001. Viral versus nuclear warheads. Answers at 10. We hear from gamers, math professor simulators, those in actual rehearsal. Involuntary immersion in the real. A pharmal target, each blockbuster drug to reach each until it goes off patent. Factoid. Leeches make shocking comeback. So how did we get to leeches? Gibbs comes back, politically misused. Before we were talking about who's articulate, now we're talking about narrowness of narrow path endured. Identical in nature, but differing in phase. Are we at odds? Can we be contained on a riling, ruthlessly captained single ship? It swirls like a stick in the whirlpool at the straits. Can we be controlled by a motherly gaze, by the tottering walk of a mother-to-be who caresses the already born with eyes and tongue, but self-absorbed in the one to come, sways as she walks, catching the sun on one shoulder, then another, perambulating mother. Or by him, one of the roughs, melding with the crowd, with them all, but untouched. Can we be compassed by thought? Let us imagine, said Gibbs, abstracting pure rule that will fuel the Third Reich, a great number of independent systems, most certainly at odds, most certainly competing. Can they be assessed in a lab, at a desk? Can they be changed by a go-between? With their disastrous capability of relaxing the major, the inherent interconnection of this extended system back to snow, to fallout in the dark, to frozen rock surrounded by black pine, backlit by the enormity of no longer starlight, illumining the dance of a ghostly dancer. Highwayman in the snow, who longing to see her dance exposed, waylaid her. Oh, little girls, with your babble and braids, putting raincoats on the babies, talking the toddlers out of fright at the lightning. One of you shinnying the radiator pole, one with bursting cheeks. You older girls not allowing cursing on the landing, where all seek shelter from the sudden summer storm. Not yet the prolonged, voluptuous, seen and re-seen, 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 immolating storm flight of the young mother teacher burned again and again before the eyes of her daughter and her son. Not narrow enough, the path of control, Canaveral, Chernobyl, not narrow at all. This poem takes a longer term perspective. Its title, Amma, means an abbess or spiritual mother, or in China, a friend that helps raise a child. All good. Amma. In this desert, glass turns perfect. All harshness raining on it grinds away every jag and nodule. None of it is blank. As it ages, it purples. Even the black volcanic glass, conchoidal, sharp, eventually dissolves, becoming as deep a pool as a pupil opening into an iris. So Frederick Douglass cannot be praised highly enough, and is best praised, to my mind, in this sonnet by Robert Hayden. When it is finally ours, this freedom, this liberty, this beautiful and terrible thing, needful to man as air, usable as earth, when it belongs at last to all, when it is truly instinct, brain matter, diastole, systole, reflex action, when it is finally one, when it is more than the gaudy mumbo jumbo of politicians, this man, this Douglass, this former slave, this Negro beaten to his knees, exiled, visioning a world where none is lonely, none hunted, alien, this man, superb in love and logic, this man, shall be remembered. Oh, not with statues, rhetoric, nor with legends and poems and wreaths of bronze alone, but with the lives grown out of his life, the lives fleshing his dream of the beautiful, needful thing. And I'll close with a poem that I wrote in New Hampshire when I was fortunate enough to visit a writer's colony there. Praise to the generosity that makes possible places of refuge. It's called Visiting the Woods. I hate the tall pines down, their dark green arms curved over the snow. They look like mothers in a storm, bodies thrown completely on the young. Broken limbs, stumps, strips of bark. This withered, jagged wood is beautiful. Trees rubbed gray or silver if thin. Leaves that curl like parchment on a dry stem. Beds of rusted needle. The pond, frozen hard. At the edge of a large field, where at night the stars stand in rivers of smaller stars, filling the low sky, coming down closer to the boulders. A small fire smokes in a grove. The air today not nearly so freezing. The man who built the fire leans unmoving on his shovel. We watch the red transparent movements filling with air, smell the pine burning. Is it all right? I asked. Yes, he said. Then, very unlike him, he smiled and said it again. Yes. Thank you.
All right, all right, all right. Let me thank these three wonderful poets, Connie Post, Margo Taft Seaver, Stephanie Strickland. You've been so generous as to Zoom with us here in the Poetry Flash series for this hour. So thank you all. I'm going to bring,
Joyce and Margo and Stephanie, thank you.
Yeah.
here comes Joyce, here comes Joyce.
Thank you all. That was wonderful. I just wanted to remind you to please look in the chat box for links to purchase these wonderful books. And if you want a signed copy of Connie Post's new book, Primal Scream, please look and you can contact her directly for a signed copy. But the links are there. Thank you so much. Thank you to Molly Baldridge for the wonderful tech support.
Molly.
And thank you all for joining us, each and every one of you.
And thanks to everybody who came.
Thank you.
Joyce.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.